My beloved child. Something changed inside your soulmate when your name crossed their mind recently, and the emotion that followed surprised even them. It wasn't simply that they missed you. It was the realization of something they had been avoiding for longer than they wanted to admit. One ordinary memory of you suddenly brought back dozens of smaller moments. The way you understood things they never explained, the conversations they replayed afterward, and the strange sense that certain words between you carried more meaning than either of you acknowledged. Then one particular memory stopped them completely. It reminded them of something they almost told you once, but chose to keep hidden. And now they're wondering whether staying quiet was the biggest reason everything became so complicated. Don't skip, because what they want to say isn't what you might expect. Here is where the story becomes different. Your soulmate has been asking themselves a question they can no longer brush aside. What if they never knew how important they became to me? That question hit harder than they expected. They started thinking about all the times they appeared calm while carrying thoughts they couldn't put into words. From the outside, you may have assumed they were uncertain about you. But privately, their uncertainty was about themselves, whether they were ready to be completely honest about what this connection meant to them. And there is one truth they wish they had explained sooner. They never wanted you to believe your presence was easy to forget. In fact, certain moments with you became the standard against which they quietly compared everything that came afterward. Stay till the end, because that realization has now pushed them toward an unexpected decision. And this is the part they have rehearsed in their mind more than once. If they could speak without hesitation, they wouldn't begin with some dramatic declaration. They would tell you something far more personal. There were moments when I acted like I didn't care enough because I cared more than I knew how to handle. But even that isn't the full confession. Something huge is waiting for you, because while thinking about you, they finally recognized why they kept returning mentally to the same unfinished chapter. It wasn't only nostalgia. There is something they believe you misunderstood about their actions, and they desperately wish they could correct that misunderstanding before too much time passes. They have even imagined the exact moment they would tell you. Yet one sentence remains the hardest for them to say. And when you hear what that sentence is really about, everything you thought you understood about their silence may suddenly look completely different. What they have been holding back is finally becoming impossible for them to ignore. That difficult sentence isn't simply, "I miss you." It goes much deeper. I wish I had shown you what you truly meant to me when I had the chance. That realization is exactly what made them emotional. They remembered moments when you may have needed reassurance, yet they stayed quiet because they assumed there would always be another opportunity to explain themselves. Now they understand how easily silence can be misunderstood. But there's another detail. While replaying those memories, they recognized one specific moment when everything between you could have changed. They almost told you the truth that day. Almost. Something stopped them, and they have wondered ever since what would have happened if they had spoken. Don't skip, because that unfinished moment is connected to the surprising thing they want you to know now. The memory keeps returning because they finally understand what they were feeling back then. They weren't confused about your importance, they were overwhelmed by how naturally you had become part of their thoughts. Small things reminded them of you. A familiar phrase. A place connected to a conversation. Even ordinary moments somehow brought back something you once said. And instead of admitting how deeply those memories affected them, they tried to convince themselves that time would make everything simpler. It didn't. Their feelings became clearer. That is why their recent emotional moment wasn't about looking backward forever, it was about realizing there may still be something unfinished between you. Stay till the end, because your soulmate has now reached a conclusion they never expected. If they ever get the opportunity to speak honestly with you again, they don't want to hide behind vague words. But here comes the surprising shift. They aren't preparing some perfect speech designed to impress you. What they want is something much simpler, and much more meaningful. They want you to finally understand what their silence actually meant. There was a period when they pulled their emotions inward, not because you meant less, but because admitting how much you mattered would have forced them to confront feelings they weren't prepared to explain. Now they see how that distance may have sent you the completely wrong message. Something huge is waiting for you, because there is still one piece they haven't fully admitted even to themselves. During that emotional moment, they imagined what they would do if you suddenly appeared in front of them today. And surprisingly, the first thing they imagined wasn't explaining the past. It was asking you one question, a question whose answer could determine whether this unfinished story finally moves forward. That question has been quietly forming inside them for longer than they realized. If I finally told you everything, would you still want to hear it? And strangely, imagining your answer is what made their emotions rise again. They aren't expecting you to erase the past or instantly understand every choice they made. They simply wonder whether there is still enough openness between you for one completely honest conversation. Because there is something they never properly explained. At one point, they convinced themselves that keeping their feelings private would protect what existed between you. Instead, the silence created questions neither of you could answer. Now they can see the irony clearly. The very thing they did to avoid making matters complicated may have created the distance they never wanted. Don't skip, because while thinking about that distance, they remembered a tiny detail about you that changed the direction of their thoughts completely. It was something you probably wouldn't consider important. A moment when you showed understanding without demanding an explanation from them. They remembered how naturally you gave them room to be themselves, and suddenly they realized why memories of you kept returning. You weren't memorable because everything was perfect. You were memorable because around you, certain parts of them felt understood without having to perform or pretend. That realization brought another question. What if they had mistaken emotional comfort for something ordinary when it was actually rare? Stay till the end, because this is where their thinking shifted from regret toward clarity. They stopped asking why they couldn't forget certain moments with you and started asking what those moments had been trying to teach them. And the answer surprised them. Perhaps what mattered most wasn't some dramatic event between you. Perhaps it was the consistency of how differently they felt whenever you were genuinely present. Then came the realization they couldn't dismiss. Your soulmate doesn't only want to explain why they became quiet, they want to tell you what they discovered during that silence. They discovered that avoiding an important conversation doesn't make the truth disappear. They discovered that some connections become clearer when there is enough distance to see them without distraction. And most unexpectedly, they realized there is one thing they would do differently if another opportunity appeared. They would stop expecting you to somehow guess what they never had the courage to communicate clearly. Something huge is waiting for you, because this realization has led them toward a choice they hadn't seriously considered before. They are no longer imagining only what they would say if you crossed paths again. They are wondering whether they should be the one to create that opportunity, and there is one specific reason they suddenly feel that waiting much longer could change everything. Something inside them has shifted from simply remembering you to questioning what happens if they remain silent much longer. They realized that waiting for the perfect moment had already cost them opportunities to be honest, and they don't want to repeat that pattern. But here's what makes this different. They aren't rushing toward you because of one emotional evening. They have been noticing the same truth repeatedly. Every time they imagine moving forward without ever clearing up what happened between you, something feels unfinished. Not because they believe the past should control the future, but because you were left without information that could have changed how you understood their actions. And there is one misunderstanding in particular that bothers them most. Don't skip. They know you may have interpreted their distance as an answer, when privately, that distance meant something entirely different. They want you to know that their silence was never intended to make you question your value. They were trying to understand themselves while appearing much more certain than they actually felt. And now, looking back, they can recognize moments when you may have been waiting for clarity they simply didn't provide. That realization is difficult for them because they know they cannot rewrite those moments. They can only decide what they would do differently now. Stay till the end, because this is where their thoughts become surprisingly specific. They have imagined sitting across from you with no distractions, no carefully rehearsed lines, and no pretending that everything was simple. In that imagined conversation, they finally tell you the one thing they should have said much earlier. You affected them more deeply than their behavior ever showed. But immediately after saying it, there is something else they want to ask you. And this second question is even more important than the first. They don't want to ask whether you still think about them. They want to ask, what did my silence make you believe about us? That answer matters because they suddenly understand that they have spent so much time examining their own emotions without knowing what the experience looked like from your side. Something huge is waiting for you, because this is no longer only about what your soulmate wants to confess. They are becoming ready to hear a truth from you too, even if it challenges the story they have been telling themselves. And while imagining your possible answer, another memory surfaced, one they had almost forgotten completely. It was something you said before the distance appeared, a simple sentence they didn't fully understand at the time. Now those words suddenly make sense, and they may reveal exactly what you had been trying to tell them all along. Those forgotten words returned with surprising clarity, and suddenly your soulmate understood why they mattered. You had once hinted that honesty mattered more to you than perfect answers. At the time, they heard the words but didn't recognize what was underneath them. Now they do. You weren't asking them to have everything figured out. You may simply have wanted them to be real about where they stood. That realization changed the entire memory. They began wondering whether you had been giving them an opening to speak honestly while they were too caught up in their own uncertainty to recognize it. And that thought brought another wave of emotion, not because they can change that moment, but because they finally understand it differently. Don't skip. The biggest surprise isn't what they remembered. It's what that memory has convinced them they need to do next. For the first time, they stopped imagining a perfect reunion and started imagining a truthful conversation. No carefully chosen performance. No pretending the distance never happened. They would rather tell you, "I didn't communicate clearly, and I understand why you may have read my silence differently." That is a major shift, because earlier they were focused on whether you would understand them. Now they are equally concerned with understanding you. What did you feel when things became uncertain? What did you assume when they stopped saying what needed to be said? And what would you want them to know today? Stay till the end, because there is another realization hiding underneath those questions. Your soulmate has begun to understand that reconnecting would mean very little if the same pattern simply returned. So before taking any step toward you, they have made a quiet decision about what must be different this time. They no longer want their feelings to exist only inside their thoughts. If an opportunity to speak comes, they want their words and actions to match. But something huge is waiting for you, because their decision goes beyond finally admitting that you mattered. During that emotional moment, they ask themselves what they would most regret leaving unsaid if life simply continued forward. The answer arrived immediately. There is one truth about you they have carried privately through every memory, every unanswered question, and every attempt to make sense of the distance. It isn't a dramatic promise, and it isn't about pretending everything between you was flawless. It is far more personal than that. They realized you changed the way they understand meaningful connection itself. And now there is one final piece of that realization they are struggling to put into words, because saying it would reveal exactly why, after all this time, thinking about you still feels unfinished. The final piece is something they never expected to admit, even privately. Knowing you changed what they now recognize as genuine emotional connection. Before you, they may have believed meaningful bonds were built only through dramatic moments or perfect compatibility. But when they looked back at you, they remembered something quieter, the feeling of being noticed, understood, and remembered in ways that seemed effortless. That is why thinking about you became emotional. They weren't only remembering a person. They were remembering a version of themselves that felt more open around you. And suddenly one question became impossible to ignore. What if they had spent all this time searching for clarity when the clearest evidence had been hidden inside those ordinary memories? Don't skip, because that question led them to a realization they weren't prepared for. They began mentally separating what they truly missed from what they merely romanticized about the past. Surprisingly, the things that remained weren't grand moments. They were small details. Your patience during a difficult conversation. The way you remembered something they mentioned casually. A moment when you made them feel heard without trying to fix everything. Those memories survived because they meant something specific. Your soulmate realized they weren't longing for an imaginary perfect story. They were recognizing qualities in your connection that they had underestimated while experiencing them. Stay till the end, because this realization changed the words they want to tell you. Instead of saying, "I wish everything could go back to how it was," they would rather say, "I finally understand what I failed to appreciate when it was right in front of me." But there is still one question they need answered before they know what comes next. And this is where their emotions have turned into something more grounded, courage to face whatever the truth actually is. They want to know whether the connection you once shared belongs only to the past, or whether there is still room for a completely different beginning, one built on clarity instead of assumptions. Something huge is waiting for you, because they are no longer imagining that conversation only from their perspective. They have started imagining your response, your questions, even the possibility that you may need time before believing what they say. And surprisingly, they are willing to accept that. What matters now is finally giving you the honesty they withheld before. Yet there is one sentence they keep rehearsing, and every time they reach it, they become emotional again. Because those few words would reveal not only how they feel about you now, but the exact moment they realized their feelings had never truly become as distant as they pretended. That sentence keeps returning whenever everything around them becomes quiet. I thought distance would change what you meant to me, but instead it showed me what I couldn't see before. They never expected to reach that conclusion. For a while, they believed fewer conversations and more time apart would naturally make the memories less important. Yet something unexpected happened. The unnecessary details faded, while the meaningful ones became clearer. They began recognizing exactly what they valued about you, and that clarity made them emotional because it arrived after so much had already gone unsaid. But there is another layer they haven't fully faced. They remembered the exact moment when they first realized you were becoming more important than they intended. Don't skip, because that memory explains why they became so guarded afterward. It happened during an ordinary interaction, which is exactly why they overlooked its importance. You said something simple that made them feel understood without needing to explain everything behind it. They carried that moment with them afterward, replaying it unexpectedly. That was when they first sensed this connection was becoming different. Instead of leaning into that realization, they became more careful. They questioned themselves. They wondered whether they were reading too much into something natural. And little by little, caution replaced openness. Now they can see what they couldn't see then. Their hesitation wasn't proof that nothing mattered. It was proof that something mattered enough to make them afraid of getting the meaning wrong. Stay till the end, because once they admitted that to themselves, they discovered something surprising about the way they behaved toward you afterward. They realized there were moments when they deliberately made themselves seem less affected than they actually were. Not to play games with you, but because appearing calm felt easier than explaining emotions they hadn't yet understood. Now they wonder whether that calmness convinced you they simply didn't care. That possibility is what they most want to correct. Something huge is waiting for you, because they have started thinking beyond the confession itself. They are asking what they could actually do differently if another conversation happens. And their answer is surprisingly simple: no more expecting silence to communicate what only honest words can explain. But before they can move toward that possibility, there is one final memory they need to understand. A moment near the beginning of the distance when you reacted in a way that confused them completely. They thought they knew what your reaction meant. Now, after everything they have realized, they are beginning to suspect they misunderstood you too. That old reaction suddenly looks completely different to them now. At the time, they interpreted your quietness as proof that you had already decided to move on emotionally. So instead of asking what you were actually feeling, they made an assumption, and then built their next choices around it. But while replaying that moment recently, something didn't fit. They remembered your expression, the careful way you chose your words, and one small hesitation they had ignored. What if you weren't becoming distant because you felt nothing? What if you were simply responding to the uncertainty they had already created? That possibility shook their entire understanding of what happened between you. Don't skip, because your soulmate is beginning to realize that both of you may have been reacting to assumptions neither of you ever confirmed. And that changes everything they want to tell you. They no longer want to arrive with a finished explanation and expect you to accept it. They want to ask questions. They want to hear what those moments actually felt like from your side. Most importantly, they want to know whether there was a point when you were waiting for them to say something they never said. Stay till the end, because this is where their emotions became surprisingly calm. Once they accepted that they might not know your full truth, the pressure to create a perfect outcome disappeared. They realized the goal shouldn't be controlling what happens next. The goal should be finally making the conversation honest. And inside that realization came an unexpected sense of relief. Whatever your answer might be, they would rather know the truth than spend more time wondering about possibilities. But there is still something they haven't told themselves completely. Something huge is waiting for you, because beneath all these memories and unanswered questions sits one very simple truth: they still care what you think of them. More than they expected. When they imagine you believing that their silence meant you were unimportant, something inside them immediately wants to correct it. They want you to know that you were never forgettable to them. Yet they also understand that words alone cannot rewrite what you experienced. That is why their next thought surprised them most. Instead of wondering how to convince you, they started wondering how to show you, through consistency, honesty, and patience, that they have finally understood what went wrong. And then one final question entered their mind. A question so personal that they haven't even imagined your answer yet. If they approached you with nothing hidden this time, what would you need to hear before you could believe they truly meant it? The answer they imagine you might give has forced them to look at themselves differently. Maybe you wouldn't need a beautiful speech at all. Maybe you would need something much harder to offer, clarity that remains consistent after the emotional moment passes. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that saying you mattered is easy, showing that truth through patience, honesty, and dependable actions is what gives those words meaning. And this realization has changed the conversation they keep rehearsing. They no longer imagine arriving with every answer. They imagine admitting what they got wrong, listening without interrupting, and allowing you to explain what their silence looked like from your side. Don't skip, because while imagining that conversation, they suddenly remembered one promise they quietly made to themselves after the distance began, and until now, they had never understood why they couldn't keep it. They had once decided they would stop revisiting the connection completely. No more analyzing old conversations. No more wondering what you meant. No more mentally returning to unfinished moments. For a while, they believed they succeeded. Then something small would remind them of you, and the questions would return, not constantly, but strongly enough to reveal that something remained unresolved. Now they finally understand why. They weren't necessarily being pulled toward the past. They were being pulled toward an unanswered truth. There is a difference. Stay till the end, because recognizing that difference gave them an unexpected kind of freedom. They stopped asking, "Why can't I forget?" and started asking, "What have I still not understood?" The answer was immediate. They never learned what you truly felt when everything became quiet between you. And suddenly, your side of the story became more important to them than defending their own. That shift may be the biggest change of all. Your soulmate isn't only preparing to reveal something anymore, they are becoming ready to receive an answer they cannot control. Something huge is waiting for you, because they have realized that a genuine conversation might lead toward reconnection, closure, friendship, or something neither of you can predict yet, and they are finally willing to let truth decide instead of assumptions. But there is one thing they desperately hope you understand before that conversation ever happens. Their emotional reaction while thinking about you wasn't simply about wanting another chance. It came from realizing how much remained unsaid when both of you still had the opportunity to speak freely. And now they have identified the exact sentence they wish they had told you before the distance began. It is surprisingly simple, but it changes the meaning of almost everything that happened afterward, and they can no longer imagine keeping it hidden forever. That sentence is finally clear in their mind: you mattered to me more than I ever knew how to express. It sounds simple, but for your soulmate, those words carry every conversation they shortened, every feeling they kept private, and every moment when they almost became completely honest with you. Looking back, they can see how differently things might have felt if they had simply said it. You wouldn't have needed to guess whether your presence meant something. You wouldn't have had to interpret silence as an answer. And they wouldn't have spent so much time wondering whether you understood what they never communicated. Don't skip, because admitting this has revealed something even more surprising. Your soulmate has stopped wishing they could rewrite every detail of the past. There is only one moment they would change, and the reason they chose that particular moment says more about their feelings than any dramatic confession could. It was the moment they noticed you beginning to protect your own emotions. They sensed something had changed in you, but instead of asking what happened, they became quieter too. Now they realize that may have been the exact point when honesty was needed most. Stay till the end, because this memory has taught them something important. Two people can care and still misunderstand each other when neither one says what is actually happening beneath the surface. Your soulmate no longer wants to repeat that pattern. If another meaningful conversation ever happens, they want to ask instead of assume. They want to listen instead of preparing the perfect response. Most importantly, they want to give you something they failed to give before: certainty about what they genuinely mean. Yet there is one thing they still cannot predict. They don't know whether hearing their truth would change anything for you now, and strangely, they are beginning to accept that. Because something deeper has changed inside them. They are no longer measuring honesty by whether it produces the outcome they hope for. They simply believe you deserve to know what was real from their side. Something huge is waiting for you, because this is where their emotional realization becomes a decision. They have imagined telling you everything without asking you to immediately choose what happens next. No pressure. No assumptions. Just the truth they should have communicated long ago. But before that conversation could ever happen, they know there is one final thing they must understand about themselves. Why did thinking about you become so emotional now, after all this time? They believed they already had the answer, until another unexpected memory surfaced. And this memory doesn't come from the distance between you. It comes from one of your happiest moments together, when you said something they barely noticed then but suddenly understand completely now. That happier memory returned without warning, and this time your soulmate heard your old words differently. You had said something simple about how the smallest moments often become the ones people remember most. Back then, they smiled and moved on. Now they understand exactly what you meant, because those are the moments that stayed with them. Not the complicated conversations. Not the uncertainty. The ordinary laughter, the unexpected comfort, the feeling that neither of you needed to make every second impressive for it to matter. And suddenly they understood why thinking about you became emotional now. They weren't only remembering what went wrong, they were finally appreciating what had quietly gone right. Don't skip, because this realization has completely changed what they would say if they had one honest conversation with you today. They would not begin by trying to recreate the past. They would tell you that distance taught them to recognize things they once took for granted. They would admit that some of their strongest memories are moments they barely noticed while they were happening. And then they would say something they never expected themselves to say. I don't want another opportunity just to repeat what we had. If there is ever another chapter, I want to understand you better than I did before. Stay till the end, because that thought surprised them more than anything else. For so long, they believed missing someone meant wanting everything to return exactly as it was. Now they realize genuine growth may mean wanting something healthier, clearer, and more honest than before. But there is one uncertainty they cannot solve alone. Whether you would even want to discover what a different chapter could look like. And strangely, they are no longer trying to predict your answer. That may be the clearest sign that something inside them has matured. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate has moved from imagining outcomes to preparing for honesty. They know you could surprise them. You could tell them you once felt the same confusion. You could reveal that you understood more than they realized. Or you could explain something they never saw from your perspective. Whatever the truth is, they finally want to hear it without running from it. Yet one last realization has begun forming beneath all of this, and it may be the most important one so far. When they ask themselves what they truly want from you now, the answer isn't simply another chance. It isn't reassurance either. What they want is far more meaningful. And once they finally put it into words, it will explain why that emotional moment changed the way they see you, themselves, and everything that was left unfinished.